Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And that voice that you can hear is Mr. Jake Rusby, who joins us on Book Corner Extra Time for an episode of Match of My Life.
SRB Media.
A little bit like Match of the Day. I almost feel as though I'm going to break into song there. But it's Newcastle United's Match of My Life, your book with Alex Crook of Talk Sport fame. Before we get into the book and what it's all about, I want a little bit of a backstory about what you're all about, Jake.
Well, I wasn't actually expecting that question. So I live in the northeast. I've lived up here for about 10 years. I moved up from the south, so it's about 10 years ago, where when I was in the south, I was a football journalist and a news journalist. I moved up here and changed career, and I've got a PR company now. I've got a wife and 2 kids up here, live by the sea, and apart from it being a few degrees colder up here than it is where I'm from, I couldn't be happier, to be honest. And as I say, I've got a background in news and in sport, and I've always been a big football fan. I'm actually an Arsenal fan, and but being in the northeast, you get a real flavour for what proper football fans are like, and they are obsessed with their football up here. And it's just it was the ideal place for me to do this book, and it's been a real labour of love. It's been about a year that it's been in the making, and it only came out Monday this week, and it's just been basically it's a dream come true for me. I've always wanted to write a book, and so to finally do it literally has ticked one of my big to-dos off my bucket list.
So this is your first book.
Yes.
You've written it with Alex Crook. How did that connection come about, and what were the dynamics of the book? There's 23 players that you've spoken to about various games, so we're going to dip into that. But your connection and your friendship with Alex Crook, how did that come about?
Sure. So as I said, I moved up from the south coast. So I'm from London, but before I moved up to the northeast, I lived in Portsmouth, and I got a job in Portsmouth. The reason I moved down there, my wife was down there at the time, and I was looking for a job in Portsmouth, and I found this news agency. A news agency, for people who don't know, so it's an organisation that provides a lot of news stories for national papers, magazines, TV, all that kind of stuff. So if you read a national paper, the majority of what you see in there is agency copy, as it were. So think of PA, Reuters, places like that, but a much, much, much smaller version. So when I moved down to Portsmouth, Alex had this news agency, so he interviewed me for this job. We had an interview in the pub, and I had a pint of water, which he always reminded me of. I know, I was nervous, and I didn't want my faculties to be at all diminished by alcohol at the time. Little was I to know how many times I'd return to that pub and not order a pint of water in the coming years. So I met Alex through work, and I moved away, as I said, about 10 years ago, and this will lead me on to sort of telling you how the book came about, because I've stayed in touch with Alex. And when I moved away, Alex owned this news agency, which was called M&Y, with a gentleman called Pat Symes. Now, Pat Symes was very well known on the South Coast as being a sports journalist, used to like a real somebody down there. He wrote books with Alex, actually. So the two of them wrote a few of these Match of My Life books after I left. They did one on Bournemouth, they did one on Southampton, they did one on the Arsenal as well, actually, which I was a bit annoyed they didn't ask me to contribute towards, considering it's my favourite football team. But they did these 3 books. They may have done more, actually. I think it was 3. And then last year, Pat, he sadly got terminal cancer and he died. And it was a big loss for Alex, a loss for me too. And I went down to Portsmouth for his funeral. I flew down for his funeral last year, and it was just basically one big piss up, because that was the sort of journalistic thing to do.
No water.
No, well, yeah, he was the kind of guy, he was from the Fleet Street days where,
Old school.
you'd file your copy down the phone in the pub, that kind of thing. So we had a few drinks. It was like a brilliant way to honour his life. It's what he would have wanted. And I came back to Newcastle the following day. I flew up, and I was on the plane, and I wasn't feeling too hot, to be honest, after a heavy night. And I just had this idea, and I just thought, oh man, going back to Newcastle, that'd be the place to release a book about, favourite players' favourite games, because at that point the takeover had happened. So if you think that Newcastle fans were, supportive and passionate beforehand, obviously they've seen the Ashley era. They haven't had success in over 50 years, 54 years since their last trophy, and now they're just after the takeover. I just thought there's so much positivity around the place. That's the place to release a book about Newcastle. And actually the market up here, there wasn't nothing like this had been done really. There'd been other books about Newcastle United, but the premise of players telling the stories of their favourite games hadn't been done. And with Alex, he had a few good contacts to get the ball rolling, and that helped. So he was able to put me in touch with a couple of players who we spoke to. So I think the first person I did was Warren Barton. Yeah. And from there, once you've got one or two under your belt, it became a lot easier to get the ball rolling and to attract people into doing it. And so it just went from there really. So I fast forward a bit then. So after getting off the plane, I messaged him saying, Crookie, what do you think? Newcastle United match of my life, ? And he said, I like it. I'll ask the publisher. He sent the publisher a WhatsApp message. He's friends with the guy who owns Pitch Publishing, which is the publishing house that produces a lot of sports books, and did this one. And the guy just messaged back saying, yeah, as long as you can get your names, as long as you can get the players, for example, Shearer, we always needed to get Shearer. Yeah. Then we'll do it for you. And that was it really. And for the last year, it's been a real roller coaster. It's just been incredible. We've literally got the creme de la creme of players that we've spoken to, and it's been amazing.
What's your favourite story?
My favourite story from the book?
Yeah. What's your favourite chapter?
So there were a few. So I think I did around 13 of them, and Alex did the remaining chapters. So there are a few that I was really keen to do. So one player that I always wanted to get from the very beginning was Jonas Gutierrez, because, as I said, I'm not a Newcastle fan. I'm an Arsenal fan, but I'm a football fan first and foremost.
Absolutely.
And as I said to you, I was a news journalist. I'm passionate about stories, and his story for me was just the most incredible footballing story that I'd ever heard. Coming back from cancer to score the goal that kept Newcastle United in the Premier League. That was the essence of it. So actually carrying out that interview was probably my favourite to carry out. Yes. And also he was one of the last players we got, and I spent a long time trying to find him, trying to contact him. I had to do it in Spanish actually, because his English wasn't great on messaging, so I was messaging him in Spanish, which I'd learned in secondary school, and then finally nailing him down to do the interview. So it was for a number of reasons, that was one of my favourites. I also really loved doing Papi Cissé, who scored probably my favourite ever non-Arsenal Premier League goal, which was the you straight away know which goal I mean. So talking to him about that was incredible, really. Those two were probably my favourites to do. Another guy who I met was Bobby Moncur, who captained Newcastle United to their last piece of silverware in 1969, and I went to his house to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of the interviews had to be done on the phone or via Zoom, because the players weren't living locally anymore. Really, a few live in America, a few live around just different places around the country. And Bobby Moncur, I got a contact number for him, rang him up, and just said, "Hi, this is who I am, and this is what I'm doing. Can we have a chat?" And he invited me to his house. So I went over to his house, and I sat down and had about a 3-hour chat with him about his life and career. And that was just insane. He still had his match-worn shirt from the 1969 final, in his house. He was showing me that, and I'm a sucker for a classic football shirt. Yeah. So I enjoyed seeing that, and he had this little mini Fairs Cup trophy he got awarded. And so he, talking to him was brilliant because of the people that he could talk about. So he was able to talk about these absolute legends of the game, whether it's Brian Clough, Jackie Charlton, Matt Busby. He talked about, all these incredible names that have gone down in history, really. So I loved speaking to him, and he told me one of my favourite stories, which I'm happy to tell you now, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yes.
So when when they got back to Newcastle after winning the Fairs Cup, they won it in, where were they? Hungary.
Yeah.
And they came back, and he had the cup, and he walked off the plane, and they got onto a bus, but they weren't able to go onto like a big open air double decker bus because the route they were going to take into the city was underneath a few bridges, so they wouldn't have fitted. So what they did was they had a small, like a lower bus, and they just had the roof cut off the top, and they just had like a wooden sort of trestle table type thing in the middle, which they were able to stand on so they could see over the top of the bus, if you see what I mean, so they could see the fans. So he was standing on that, and he was holding the cup, and they went under a bridge, and he was holding the cup up, and some wires were dangling down from the bridge, like some electricity wires, and they caught on the cup, and it sent an electric shock through his body. But fortunately, because he was stood on a wooden table, that cut the flow of electricity, so it didn't kill him. But if he'd been stood on anything else, it would have killed him. And he was, obviously shaken up and took the cup down. The cup had a big black mark on it, like it had been singed from where the electricity cables had touched it. So I loved that story. And I'll tell one more if that's all right.
You can tell as many stories as you like, because I love listening to football stories. Newcastle United were the first team that I saw my team, Birmingham City, play against on the 15th of August 1972. So you carry on.
Oh, thank you. Well, obviously, I don't want to give away all the stories.
Of course you don't.
From writing the book, obviously, we wanted to get these stories about the games themselves, but Bobby Moncur's is an exact example of what we were looking for. The games, but also the stories behind the games, and just little tales of what we call them nuggets, little nuggets of gold, where you're looking for these little lines that no one's ever heard before. And that was a really, really amazing one for us to get. And I interviewed Malcolm McDonald, another legend. And I actually took him over a copy of the book the other day because he only lives around the corner from me. So I met him in a local pub, and again we had a chat, and he told me the story of his debut, which was a 3-2 win for Newcastle against Liverpool, and this Liverpool team containing Kevin Keegan and John Toshak, these again absolute legends. And he scored a hat-trick that day, and towards the end of the game he was chasing a through ball, and Ray Clements came out of his box, and Super Mac lifted the ball over Clements, and Clements just studded him in the face because, as Malcolm said, he didn't take too kindly to having hat-tricks scored against him. And so he got knocked out cold. It was the only time in his career he ever got knocked out cold, Super Mac. And he woke up back in the dressing room. Now, what he used to do before the games, he used to have a sleep on the physio's table. So he would say it would help him. It would help him to relax. We'd go for a little kip, and then he'd get up and play. So he woke up on the physio's table, and Frank Clark walked into the physio room, and Malcolm McDonald said, "Hey Frank, I've just had the most amazing dream. I just scored. I scored a hat trick against Liverpool." And Frank Clark said, "Hey Bonnie lad, you did score a hat trick. You were knocked out cold." So he thought he dreamt the whole game. So he woke up thinking that he dreamt it. I thought that was a really lovely line from Super Mac.
Now, you're right, because when he walked onto that pitch, he was Malcolm McDonald. When he walked off the pitch, he was Super Mac.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
There's a lovely story about the song, isn't there? Super Mac, superstar, how many goals have you scored so far?
Yeah.
And he was, Malcolm, he was like a racehorse. What a player Malcolm McDonald was. And I was fortunate to do an interview with Malcolm. I do lots of football podcasts. In fact, one of the podcasts I do is Game of My Life, where I interview players and talk about the games of their life. But it
There
isn't
you
just
go.
one team, it's different players that I've done legends of the 70s interviews with, and then we've talked about those games. And Malcolm was one of the people that that I interviewed, and what a legend he is. And when I looked at Malcolm's chapter, there was, and that's what I looked at, and that's what I loved about the book. It isn't just about the match of the life, it goes into more depth about the player as well. And I thought that was really good because you're drawing out the personality. And I remember Malcolm, you ended his chapter on when he scored 5 goals against Cyprus at Wembley, and that's the last time that he played at Wembley for England. But there was
Yeah.
also a lovely little story about how Don Revie trousered 200 quid, and how the guys that at Match of the Day or Sports Night, who done the broadcast that night, wasn't too happy and told Malcolm sometime after in a pub about what had happened, and Malcolm had no idea about what had gone on that night apart from he'd scored 5 goals, and he wondered why they'd blanked him after that, and that was the reason why. Don Revie. And I love the word foisted that you mentioned in there, because that's exactly the word that Malcolm used to me, or said to me, that Don Revie used to describe how Malcolm MacDonald was foisted upon me. I didn't want you. What a thing to say to a player that's going in to make his debut.
It's so sad, isn't it? Because
It is.
this is a guy who was, he scored 30 goals a season for 4 seasons in a row, or
Yeah.
something like that. And if anyone deserved to get a decent England career, it was him. And he just, because of politics and personality clashes, he didn't get it. And it's really quite sad. He doesn't seem bitter about it at all. Actually, he was really quite level-headed about it all. But he, really, we as an England fan base deserve to see more of him.
I think we've deserved to see a lot more players than we have seen, and it's the same now. England managers, whether it be in the 70s or now, are a little bit reticent to play players with flair. They don't like those kind of players. They don't know how to use those kind of players. Malcolm was quite superb, and I love the story about with Bobby Robson in your book as well, because as a young boy he was a Fulham fan, and he used to chase the Fulham players, and he took Bobby Robson's bags all the way up to his office. And many years later, when Bobby signed him, he said, "I recognise you, don't I?" He said, "Yeah, I carried your books. Oh, that's the one." And then pretty much his last game in the 78 final for Arsenal, your team that Malcolm joined then, was against Ipswich Town. Who was the manager? Bobby Robson, which was 10 years after he'd signed him. So football is very romantic. Football has some great stories. Asprilla, red or white?
Say that again, Aspria.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean, it was red, the wine,
Was
you
it
mean?
red? Yeah. Half a
Yeah, it was
bottle of
red
wine
wine.
before he started. Fair
Yeah,
play.
unbelievable. So he was one of the players that unfortunately we couldn't get hold of. I just couldn't find him. I used all my journalistic know-how to try and track him down. And then actually, after we'd submitted the manuscript for the book, he turned up in Newcastle to do an event, and I was like, oh, if only that had happened a few months earlier, I would have gone and collared him to get him to do the book. But he was a player that we asked a lot of other players about. So we asked everyone to give us a story about him, and there were a few.
And some of them, I'm guessing, you couldn't actually print.
Yeah, exactly. You had to be very careful. There were a few stories actually we have to be careful of, because obviously with things like this, libel applies.
Yeah.
So you have to be quite careful. We were fortunately with having a proper publishing house behind you. They were very good with all that as well. So they would always fact check and scour everything for us. So that was really, really helpful.
Frank Clark, you mentioned Frank. I was reading that chapter. Couldn't believe how he left Newcastle, and then Gordon Lee wanted him back, but too late. He'd signed for Browne at Nottingham Forest, and in the Malcolm MacDonald, literally a reporter did ask him. Well, he said, "You've got a new manager," and he said, a few names. Gordon Lee, who? And that was all over the paper warning. Gordon Lee wasn't best pleased when he saw that headline.
No, he wasn't. Again, that was something I spoke to him about that a few days ago when I went over and dropped his book off. And he was friends with the journalist who did that story. But he didn't hold any grudges. He blamed the sub-editor who put the headline on, Gordon who. But yeah, that was the beginning of the end for Supermac at Newcastle United, I think.
And it was a wonderful story with Supermac. I just want to stay the Supermac Park at the moment. When he actually signed for Newcastle, he arrived in a Rolls Royce, and one of the hacks had said, "This is the first time I've seen a player arrive in his signing on fee."
Yeah, brilliant. Hey, I love that. And the fact he sort of went in, I think he went in and someone cornered him and said, I introduced himself and then said, just play your heart out. These guys will love you. Yeah. And then at the end of the conversation said, by the way, my name's Jackie Milburn. Oh, was it? Okay. So and then Jackie Milburn took him on a little tour of the Northeast and took him around, showed him different places. And because he was one of the first ones I did. And I'm just remembering now, he said that he took him to his hometown, didn't he, to like a pit or something, and pointed out the window and said, these are people who go down the pit Monday to Friday, however many hours a day. That's who you're playing for. That's who you're representing when you go out there. And I thought that was really, again, romantic and really what an image to have, this absolute icon driving around this new boy, Malcolm McDonald, in the 70s and taking him to a pit village. Just insane, really.
Frank Clark, his second goal was against my team a couple of weeks after. So a little bit like a bus or a taxi. You wait for hours and then two arrive at the same time.
Yeah, he said it was, he'd gone hundreds of games without scoring. And then, like you said, like a bus, two within the space of a few weeks. That was a brilliant story for me to get. And, obviously I think he's the fourth highest ever appearance maker for the tune. So to get him was great, and he was such a lovely bloke. And he's coming along to our launch night. We're launching the book in Whitley Bay on the 24th of November, where we've got four ex-players coming down, and Supermac's one of them, and Frank Clark's one of them too. So to get them back on the stage together would be great, because obviously they made quite a few appearances together too. So it'd be lovely to meet Frank, because I just did the interview with him over the phone, and I always find that face to face and whatever way you can do it, either with a video call or face to face in person, you get more from them, especially when they're over an age. It's a bit more difficult. But he was so forthcoming, and it's such a brilliant memory as well. So some of the players I interviewed who only retired 10, 15 years ago couldn't remember much about their games, but he could remember a hell of a lot more than a lot of them.
Mind you, certainly in particular that game, scoring his first goal. And where did you get the information from the lineups, etc., and the managers from?
Do you know what? I can't. A lot of the time, so it varied. There's a lot of very trustworthy sites that have all of the games chronicled, like all of the Newcastle games in history chronicled. Yeah. So I used them and I double check them. And then for the Premier League and league games, the Premier League have their own records. So I'd go through the Premier League because that's obviously the most trustworthy source. So I can't remember the individual game and where I got that one from, because I did quite a few, and but we had them all checked by the publishing house and everything. So as I said, one of the things about having the publishers there was there were a couple of times where things slipped through and they picked them up, because I think when you spend so long working on one chapter, one player, you can be blinded a little bit when you've just been.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
And now, a next-level moment from AT&T Business. Say you've sent out a gigantic shipment of pillows, and they need to be there in time for International Sleep Day. You've got AT&T 5G, so you're fully confident. But the vendor isn't responding, and International Sleep Day is tomorrow. Luckily, AT&T 5G lets you deal with any issues with ease, so the pillows will get delivered and everyone can sleep soundly, especially you. AT&T 5G requires a compatible plan and device. 5G is not available everywhere. See att.com/5G for you for details.
Doing it for so long, and then it takes someone else to notice little errors here or there. But they were great, actually. The publishers had someone specific whose job it is to fact check, and they were really helpful.
Well, Terry Curran swears blind he played in that game.
Oh.
And there's no mention of him, because we were talking about it, because in the book then Frank tells you the story about many years after he played with Terry Curran, an ex-Doncaster Rover player, at Nottingham Forest. And TC, we've done this a few times on the podcast, that we do the Curran View with Terry Curran. In fact, this week, and he said the game was unbelievable. I mean, we got beat 6-0. Frank Clark scored the 6th goal, and we couldn't believe the noise. The noise was deafening. It was quite incredible. It was quite something. So Newcastle 6, Doncaster Rovers 0. And then in the third round, drew Birmingham City, and I think a late Trevor Francis penalty put paid to Newcastle's run in the League Cup. But they had a fantastic run in the FA Cup. Did Bobby Moncur mention the Nottingham Forest game in the quarter-final of the FA Cup in 1974?
I'm trying to recall if he did or not. It was that long an interview. I don't think it went into the chapter. I had to cut quite a lot out.
Yeah.
Remind me, what happened in it?
What happened is I done a game of my life interview with Pat Howard, who was centre half that day.
Yeah.
Nottingham Forest took an early lead, and I think they were 2-0, and then I think Newcastle pulled one back 2-1, and then Forest were awarded a penalty. And as Pat Howard said, Duncan McKenzie ran into our player, and I had a word with the referee, and I told him it wasn't a penalty, and the referee told him to shut up. And Pat said, I didn't. And I kept on. Ref, it's never a penalty. He said, if you don't shut up, I'm going to send you off. And he said, if you send me off, there'll be a riot here. He said, right, that's it. Sent him off. Sure enough, there was a riot. The Newcastle fans come on. Score was 3-1 at the time, because Forest had converted the penalty. They went in, they took the players off to get rid of the Newcastle players, fans that were on the pitch. When they came back out, Newcastle scored in the dying minutes with a Bobby Moncur goal, and they knocked out Nottingham Forest 4-3. Well, Forest put an official complaint in, and the FA agreed that Forest, because of the pitch invasion, were hard done by and granted them another game. Should have really gone to the City Ground, but it didn't. It went to Goodison Park. Drawed 0-0. Pat played in that game, and then in the second game he didn't. Malcolm MacDonald scored the winner, and that set them up with a semi-final tie against Burnley. But that was a very, very iconic FA Cup game in 1974. Incredible. The game that never was. It was a void game.
Yeah, I recall now. I remember him telling me about. He didn't go into too much detail about it because we were sort of focusing on some of the other games. But he was telling me. I remember him saying that. Yeah, the game that had to be replayed. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah.
Oh, it was quality, and also as well Newcastle in the 70s. So I love the 70s era. The Hereford game. I mean, what a game that was. Ronnie Radford, bless him, what a goal. I know it wasn't for Newcastle, but Newcastle was certainly involved in that game. Very, very much an iconic game of the 70s in the FA Cup.
That's right. And yes, again, Malcolm MacDonald talks about that game because he was right behind him. He was right behind the goal, so he was sort of trying to get back and tackle him, and he just absolutely walloped it. And he had the best view in the ground, probably. He had the little story that he said that was the game that made John Motson, because John Motson was an up and coming commentator. He was given like a sort of the dregs, as it were, a game that was sure to be a Newcastle win, and he got one of the greatest goals ever scored in a massive cup upset, and that sort of made his name.
I think the story was that somebody was ill who was commentating, and John Motson literally come off the subs bench. But you're right, it actually made John Motson. But Pat Howard on the pitch, as the ball flew past his ear, he said to me, I thought, it's got half a chance at that. He flew into the top corner. In fact, in back past the Retro Football magazine, there's a lovely picture of Pop Robson scoring against Feyenoord in 1968. Pop Robson, another legend of Newcastle. What era? Because you cover a spectrum, don't you? The oldest being Bobby Moncur, and then pretty much up to date. Did you ever think about getting Lee Bowyer and Kieran Dyer having a chat?
We talked about it. We never approached them. We did talk about it. We were looking at speaking to another player who I won't name because we sort of considered that he didn't have legendary status. He was playing. He was in the squad that day, and we just thought we kind of had a caliber of players that were, that are considered legends or cult heroes, and they would have been able to talk about that kind of escapade. But we decided against it in the end. This was right at the end, and we had all these iconic games covered. So it was something we thought about, but also I think that it's kind of been done to death, that game as well. Well, not that game, but that spectacle has been talked about loads. And I think if we were to approach either of those players and say, talk about that fight again, they probably would have told us to jog on, to be honest. So yes, we didn't go near that one in the end. But from our point of view, we started out with a certain number of games that we wanted to have covered, and we got all of them. I think it was probably 4 or 5 that we thought those are the iconic Newcastle games that we need, and we got all of them, which is that kind of ticked a big box for us.
And in 1974, Newcastle United met their Waterloo at Wembley against Liverpool. Again, another iconic cup final, and very much in the news because Newcastle had a purple kit, and there was a great story that Malcolm tells about the purple kit and how Newcastle United actually wore that purple kit. Some great players that Newcastle have had also, Gaza, Chrissy Waddle, Peter Beardsley. Any chance of a word from Gaza?
So for Gaza, Gaza's one of the players that made me fall in love with football, despite being an Arsenal fan. I was born in 1984. He was an icon for me. So I was always keen to get him. And we spoke to someone who used to represent him. So I managed to get hold of someone just to see if they could give me a steer for how to get hold of him. And he said, look, he's going to want money to do it. And at that point, we didn't have any sort of budget. So we from that point, we just thought, well, there's no point putting our eggs in that basket. We'll just head elsewhere. Chrissy Waddle, I approached him and he didn't want to do it, which is again fair enough. A few players didn't want to. I think I probably got knocked back 3 or 4 times, but as I said, we ended up with over 20 players who did want to do it. And from our point, it would have been great to get some of these guys, but the fact we couldn't. I mean, the fact it's their prerogative. They didn't. Wouldn't. It's I didn't really feel anything, any negativity towards them. And if we do a sequel, because I think there are enough legends to go around to do a sequel, then I would love to approach them again, because I felt like towards the end of the book, Alex and I were talking, and we felt we were a bit light on the 80s. We've got a lot of sort of 60s, 70s legends, plenty of 90s and into the 2000s, but we're a bit light on the 80s, and so that was our only slight regret. But it's one of those things. We approached together an iconic player from the 80s who didn't want to do it, and that's fine. And as I said, we ended up with more than we could have ever hoped for in terms of the caliber of player that spoke to us.
And the forward by Rafa Benitez.
Yeah, amazing. So again, as I said to you earlier, I speak a little Spanish, so I got hold of his agent's contact details, and I emailed him in Spanish and said, this is what we're doing. And he emailed back to say, okay, I need a bit more information. Where's the book going? Who have you spoken to? When will it be out? All this kind of stuff. So I replied, and he again came back to me again and said, okay, thank you very much. I'll speak to Rafa. Hopefully he'll do it. So I left it at that. Thought, oh, brilliant. Okay. And then it was the next day, actually, I was sat in my spare room / office, and I got a phone call, and it was a withheld number. And I thought, it's going to be someone trying to tell me, do some sort of car claim cashback thing or something. I thought, all right, I'll pick it up. Picked it up, and it was Rafa. it just rang me up. Oh, hello. And so I did the interview with him there and then, and it was brilliant. And I tell you what a guy he is. Yeah. What a lovely man. Who, I said to him, this is one of my favourite things from this whole process. I said to him, I just wanted to say, first of all, Mr. Benitez, thank you so much for this. And he said, Jake, calling me Rafa. And that was, for me, was just like, what a guy. Just, don't call me Mr. Benitez. Call me Rafa. That's who I am. Ordinary guy who just happens to be a football manager. And he chatted to me about Mike Ashley, talked to me about why he stayed at the club and went down with them and coming back up, and why he left and why he didn't take the job when it was when the club was bought a couple of years ago, because he was in the frame for that. So he sort of spilled the beans on that a little bit. He was brilliant. Really great guy to talk to.
Well, you do find that when you talk to, football players and football managers are no different from us football fans. The only thing is they were just much, much better at football, than what we are, or certainly were. But, I find we're talking to so many of the former players, they just love talking about the game of football, and it brings back some fantastic memories. Another memory, the board kicker, Ketspire. I mean, he was a right character, wasn't he? Good player as well, Ketspire.
He was, and Alex spoke to him, and one of the lines that came out from that was that he just really regretted doing that, the board kicking, because you mentioned his name, and that's what people will think of, but he was a very, very good player, and I think that he thinks that some of his contributions are forgotten about because of that celebration, which was just a complete outburst, wasn't it? But again, he was one of the players we really, really wanted, because we've obviously got like legends in terms of players who've gone to achieved a lot with the clubs or played a lot of caps, and Ketspire is one of those cult heroes that we wanted, who will always have that kind of cult hero status, and we did get him, and that was great. I think he was, I'm not sure if he still is, but he was managing the Cypriot team, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how we got hold of him. Again, Alex did him and managed to get his contact details. So it's very helpful having someone who's working within the sports journalism industry, because he does have a few contacts. But for me, I enjoyed trying to track people down. So just using my journalistic skills, these parts of my brain that have probably been a bit redundant for the past few years, and just finding these players, getting hold of them, convincing them, and then doing the interviews and then writing up their words. It's been that process gives you a real sense of satisfaction.
I'm getting from you that you would like to get back into this football journalism and writing a few more books. You've got the book again now, haven't you, Jake?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, this is what steered me away from journalism was I did a lot of news stuff as well, and it was a lot of negative news sells, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it was a lot of negativity with what I did, and everything that goes on in the world. I didn't really want to keep my head in that, but I do love sport. I love football, and I love writing about it. And so, I would love to write another book, and I've got a few ideas for roads I could go down with it, and hopefully that they'll be attractive. There'll be an attractive position to a publisher, or if they're not, maybe I'll look at self-publishing. But I feel like this has been a big achievement for me, because it's always been something I wanted to do, and so to have the idea of doing it and then to see it through and to finally hold the book in my hand has been one of the greatest achievements I've made in my life, and I'm quite proud of myself for it. And I think I'm hoping that I can, moving forward, do something else similar.
I think you should be proud of it, because it's a fantastic book. Pitch Publishing are, in my opinion, the number one publishers of football, not just football, but they do other sports books as well. I mean, it is a work of art. I love the artwork on the front and also the back. And it's usually somebody from Pitch that designs the artwork. Is that this case in your book?
It is. They designed the artwork, but what was really nice was that we were given the freedom to put in the pictures of the players that we wanted. So basically, they said to me, "We've got accounts with Alamy or Getty or whoever it was.
Yes.
Go and find them on the websites and find the pictures you want to use." So there was still we still had a lot of creativity in the process. Yeah. So that the pictures that you see on the front cover and the back cover and on each player's got their own picture for their chapter. I did all those. I picked them out, and then someone at Pitch who has a design skills needed put them all together and made this beautiful looking book. So yeah, it was a nice, it was a really, really lovely thing to be able to do, was to actually have a bit of creative control as well.
And a lovely picture on the back with Bobby Moncur sitting next to the in City Fairs Cup, and Joe Harvey, what a
Yeah.
fantastic manager of Newcastle United Joe was. And I didn't realise until I started doing these podcasts and talking to Pat that Keith Birkinshaw was his assistant then, that went on to Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah, that's right. And again, every player from that era that I spoke to were just wax lyrical about him.
Yeah.
And Super Mac was only saying the other day he reckons he should get a statue somewhere at St
I
James's
agree.
Park, because he achieved a lot with that club. And for me it's been a learning curve as well, because this is 50, 60 years ago. So so for me it's been a lot of finding out a lot about these guys and things I didn't know before, and really coming to find a lot of respect for some of these players and managers that we've spoken to or heard about. So that's been a really interesting thing to do. And yeah, some of the stories about Joe as well were great, and he came out of it smelling of roses, really, to be honest. He seemed like a really, really good guy and a real football man.
Again, growing up in the 70s, you kind of always remember your first Newcastle players or your Newcastle manager, and Joe Harvey was that manager. Great players that they've had in the past, the likes of Stuart Barraclough and John Tudor and Jinky. Jimmy Smith, what a player Jimmy Smith was.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, what we wanted to get were these players that we spoke to talking about these guys.
Yeah.
So, players like Terry Hibbett and
legend.
Really, really amazing players that, again, I didn't know too much about, but it's been a real process finding out about these guys and really finding these old YouTube clips and trying to watch them play, and it's amazing really watching these guys and how different football was, but how these pitches, how different they were, and the balls and how heavy they were, but these guys were just like players like Terry Hibbett just gliding across the pitch with the ball, just making it look easy.
Absolutely. And guys, check out that pass in 1974 with Terry Hibbett when he pinged the ball straight through to Malcolm MacDonald against Burnley. Terry was a genius of a player, as was Tony Green, and sadly Tony's career got cut short through injury. But Newcastle have had some fabulous players, and you've done them very proud with this wonderful book, you and Alex. And the only thing that I would say with TalkSport, and I do listen to TalkSport every day, I'd love to hear a little bit more historical content on TalkSport. I'd love to, on Match of the Day, see a lot more historical content and football focus, etc. And that's what I've loved about this book. You brought some fantastic historical content to life, and fans can read about their heroes of today and pay honour and tribute to their heroes of yesteryear, because the club today is what it is because of those stars of the past.
Absolutely, and I concur. I've got a passion for history as well as football, so this book brought together my two greatest passions, to be honest. So yeah, I completely agree. I'll have a word with Alex and tell him they need to get some more historical stuff on there. I think a lot of TalkSport is, there's a lot of controversy on there, people voicing their opinions and things like that, and they get people. That's how you get people calling in, isn't it? You get someone. You get Gabby Agbonlahor saying something about someone, and then everyone else gets annoyed about it and calls in, and that's just how that works. But yeah, I think that if there was more, reviewing of old games, like an On This Day feature or something like that, then I completely agree. As I said, I love looking back into history and mixing history and football. We just couldn't get anything sexier to me, to be honest. I love it.
Absolutely, and I'm a subscriber to Backpass magazine, as I am with When Saturday Comes, and I just love the game of football, and I would love to have one or two of the guests on TalkSport, some of our heroes of yesteryear, just reminiscing about some of the games. Because Alan Brazil, wonderful, legendary presenter. I think it would go great with Brazil for a nice little 5-minute chat about a game or a match of their lives. So, can I thank you, sir, so much for your time. Thank you for sending me a copy of your book as well. It really is much appreciated. And where can people get this book from if they're not going to turn up at your live event? Amazon is usually the place that I access books from. I know people say, and other stores are available. Yes, we know they are. But what's the easiest way to get the book, and what way gives you more money in your pocket to access this book as well?
Well, that's a good question. So yeah, it is on Amazon, and it is the easiest way to get it. It's a bit cheaper on Amazon, which actually means I get a little bit less money. But to be honest, this whole thing hasn't been about money for me. It really is. You know, I'm sure you do plenty of what you do, not for money, but for this, as you said, the love of the game and for the love of what you do.
I haven't earned a penny from sorry, Jake. I haven't earned a penny from any of the stuff that I've done over the last 10 years. I just love the game of football, and I love bringing stories to life about my heroes when I was growing up as a kid.
Yeah, exactly, and that was why I wrote this. It wasn't for money. So you can get it on Amazon. You can get it from Waterstones. You certainly can in the Northeast, or you can order it to your Waterstones store. There's places like WH Smith's, Hive.co.uk, Blackwell's Bookshop, and I believe it's going to be an ebook as well. It's not out on ebook yet. That's something I need to chase. But I read a lot of my fiction through ebook, so I think that we'd be missing a trick if it didn't go out onto Kindles. Hopefully that does.
And finally, your handles, your pages. How can people look up with you and say, Jake, I've just bought your book. It's a fantastic read. And when you're doing your next one, pal, how can people do that and link up with you, Jake?
Oh, thank you for the opportunity to say. I've got a Match of My Life, it's NUFC Match of My Life Instagram page and Facebook page, and I'm on Twitter as well. I'm trying to think. I've got two handles. I'm just at Jake Rusby. That's me. Yep. That's my working sort of journalist handle. I've also got a private account, but that's the one in which I sort of tweet about the book. Sure. And yeah, so you can find me, as I said, at Jake Rusby or Match of My Life on Instagram or Facebook, and that's where you can get updates about the book, places to buy it, little snippets of stories, all those kind of things.
Fantastic. Can I thank you so much, sir, for your time, and all the very best going forward. And anything, your next projects, please keep in touch. We'll do another podcast and we'll help you and promote you all we can.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. You know your stuff, don't you, Paul? It's been a real pleasure to talk to someone who really knows the game.
Well, I just love the game of football. It is a beautiful game, isn't it? And pass on my regards to Alex and all at Talk Sport as well.
Thank you. I will do that.
Lovely. Thanks, Jake. Cheers, pal.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Paul.
It's all right, mate. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
At Leidos, a brilliant mind is smart, but a brilliant team is smarter. A ship that finds enemy subs is smart, but an autonomous fleet, that's smarter. Defending against cyber attacks? Smart. Stopping attacks before they start? Smarter. And using AI tools is smart, but integrating trusted mission AI into your technology is smarter. We're not just making technology solutions in national security and health. We're making smart smarter. Leidos.